If you took your blood pressure right now, what would the numbers tell you? For tens of millions of adults, the answer would be something they would rather not see. A reading slightly higher than it should be. A reading they have been watching creep upward over the years. A reading their doctor mentioned at the last visit with a small note of concern. A reading they have been taking medication for, but that still does not look quite right. High blood pressure is one of the most common conditions in adult life and one of the most consequential. It is the leading risk factor for stroke, one of the leading risk factors for heart attack, a major contributor to kidney disease, a quiet driver of cognitive decline, and a force that shapes the trajectory of long-term health more than most people realize. It is also one of the conditions most responsive to what you eat. I want to walk you through 5 specific ways to use food to lower your blood pressure today. Not vague advice, not generic encouragement to eat better. 5 concrete, evidence-supported strategies that, applied consistently, can meaningfully change the numbers on your blood pressure cuff over weeks and months. My name is Dr. Barbara O'Neill, and what I am about to share with you is some of the most well-researched nutrition information in modern medicine. The connection between diet and blood pressure has been studied extensively, and the findings are consistent enough to be acted on with confidence. By the end of this conversation, you will have a clear plan you can begin at your very next meal, and the changes you make may genuinely reduce your need for medication or improve the control you are getting from the medications you take. Your blood pressure is determined by 2 main factors: the volume of fluid in your circulation and the resistance of the blood vessels through which that fluid flows. Anything that increases the volume or increases the resistance pushes your blood pressure higher. Anything that decreases either of these brings your blood pressure down. Food affects blood pressure through several pathways. Sodium intake directly affects fluid retention and blood volume. Potassium, magnesium, and calcium intake affect how your blood vessels and kidneys regulate pressure. Certain nutrients support the health and flexibility of blood vessels themselves. Body weight, which is heavily influenced by what you eat, affects the workload of the cardiovascular system, and specific foods have direct effects on blood pressure through mechanisms researchers are still clarifying. The 5 strategies I am about to describe address these pathways through practical, accessible changes. They are not exotic. They are not expensive. They do not require special supplements or complicated regimens. They are changes that almost anyone can begin making today in their own kitchen with foods available at any grocery store. The first strategy is to dramatically reduce sodium, particularly from processed and packaged foods. This is the single most important dietary change for blood pressure and the one that produces the largest measurable effect for most people. I want to be specific about what this involves because the standard advice to use less salt misses where most of the sodium actually comes from. The salt shaker on your table accounts for a relatively small portion of the sodium most people consume. The vast majority comes from processed and packaged foods, where sodium has been added for flavor, preservation, and texture before you ever bring the product home. The biggest sources to address are bread and rolls, which, despite not tasting particularly salty, contain significant sodium per serving. Cold cuts, deli meats, bacon, ham, sausage, and hot dogs, which are among the most sodium-dense foods in the modern food supply. Pizza, which combines several high-sodium ingredients into one. Canned soups, which often contain enormous amounts of sodium in a single bowl. Sandwiches from restaurants and fast food, which are frequently among the saltier meals available. Frozen meals, which can contain a day's worth of sodium in a single tray. Cheese, particularly processed cheese products. Sauces, dressings, and condiments, which can contain surprising amounts of sodium per serving. Crackers, chips, pretzels, and savory snacks. Restaurant meals in general, which typically contain far more sodium than you would use cooking at home. The practical strategy is to read labels and become aware of the sodium content of the foods you eat regularly. Choose lower sodium versions when available. Cook more meals at home where you control the seasoning. Use herbs, spices, lemon, vinegar, garlic, and other flavor enhancers that add interest without adding sodium. Reserve restaurant meals for occasions rather than daily eating. The blood pressure reduction from significant sodium reduction is genuine and measurable. Studies have shown that reducing sodium intake from typical Western levels to recommended levels can lower systolic blood pressure by 5 to 10 points or more in people who are sodium sensitive, which includes many older adults, many people of African ancestry, and many people who already have high blood pressure. This is not a small effect. A reduction of 5 to 10 points in your systolic blood pressure can be the difference between needing medication and not, or between adequate control and inadequate control on your current medications. The reduction takes time to show up. The full effect of dietary sodium reduction typically takes 4 to 8 weeks to fully establish because your body has to adjust its fluid balance and your blood vessels have to adapt. Stay consistent. The changes are coming even when you do not see them immediately. The second strategy is to dramatically increase the foods rich in potassium. This is the partner to sodium reduction and equally important. Potassium works against the effects of sodium in the body. It helps the kidneys excrete sodium. It helps blood vessels relax and it directly supports lower blood pressure. Most adults consume far less potassium than they should. The recommended intake is around 4,700 milligrams per day for most adults, but typical intake in modern diets is often half that or less. Increasing your potassium intake to recommended levels can lower blood pressure significantly, particularly in combination with sodium reduction. The good news is that potassium comes from foods that are also good for you in many other ways. The strategy is to build your meals around foods that are naturally rich in potassium. The biggest sources to incorporate are leafy green vegetables including spinach, Swiss chard and beet greens, sweet potatoes, white potatoes with skin and other tubers, beans and lentils of all kinds, which are among the most potassium-dense foods available, tomatoes and tomato products including tomato sauce and tomato juice, bananas, the classic potassium source, though many other fruits provide as much or more, oranges and orange juice in moderation, avocados, which are excellent sources, cantaloupe and other melons, dried fruits including raisins, apricots and prunes in moderation because they are also calorie-dense, yogurt and milk, which provide both potassium and calcium, fish including salmon, tuna and others, mushrooms, pumpkin and winter squash, coconut water in moderation. The practical approach is to include several potassium-rich foods in each day's meals, a breakfast that includes fruit, a lunch that includes vegetables and possibly beans, a dinner built around vegetables and a protein source like fish or beans, snacks that include fruit or yogurt. One important caution. People with kidney disease or who are taking certain medications, particularly ACE inhibitors, ARBs, or potassium-sparing diuretics, may need to be careful about potassium intake because they can develop dangerously high blood potassium. If you have kidney disease or are on these medications, please discuss potassium intake with your doctor before significantly increasing it. For most healthy adults, however, increasing potassium intake is one of the most powerful and underused strategies for blood pressure reduction. The third strategy is to follow the principles of the DASH eating pattern. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It is one of the most well-studied dietary patterns for blood pressure reduction, developed specifically through research at the National Institutes of Health, and it has been shown in multiple large studies to produce significant reductions in blood pressure within weeks of adopting it. The DASH pattern is not a strict diet with foods you must avoid forever. It is a set of principles for how to build your overall eating. The principles are these: build your meals around vegetables and fruits. Aim for several servings of vegetables and several servings of fruits each day. The variety matters. Different vegetables and fruits provide different nutrients that work together to support blood pressure. Include whole grains rather than refined ones. Brown rice, oats, whole grain bread, quinoa, and similar foods rather than white rice, white bread, and refined cereals. Include lean proteins with an emphasis on fish, poultry, beans and nuts rather than red meat and processed meats. 2 or 3 servings of fish per week is particularly beneficial. Include dairy in moderate amounts, choosing low-fat or fat-free versions if your overall diet includes adequate fat from other sources. Yogurt, milk and cheese can all be part of the pattern. Include nuts, seeds and legumes regularly. These provide protein, fiber, healthy fats and the minerals that support blood pressure regulation. Limit saturated fats, processed foods, sweets and sugary beverages. These do not need to be eliminated entirely, but they should not be the foundation of the diet. Limit sodium, as we discussed in the first strategy. The DASH pattern produces blood pressure reductions that are comparable to those achieved with a single blood pressure medication for many people. Adapted consistently, it can reduce systolic blood pressure by 8 to 14 points in people with hypertension and somewhat less in people with normal blood pressure. The effects begin within about 2 weeks and continue to develop over the following months. The practical strategy is not to follow DASH as a rigid program, but to gradually shift your eating pattern toward its principles. More vegetables, more fruits, more whole grains, more fish, beans and nuts. Less processed food, less added sugar, less excessive sodium. Over weeks and months, your pattern shifts and your blood pressure follows. The fourth strategy is to incorporate specific foods that have been shown to have direct blood pressure lowering effects. Beyond the general dietary patterns, certain specific foods have been studied for their direct effects on blood pressure. Including these regularly can contribute additional benefit beyond the broader pattern. Beets and beet juice contain dietary nitrates that the body converts into nitric oxide, a compound that relaxes blood vessels and lowers blood pressure. Studies have shown measurable reductions in blood pressure within hours of consuming beet juice, and the effects can be sustained with regular consumption. Adding cooked beets to salads, drinking beet juice, or incorporating beetroot into other dishes can be a useful addition. Garlic has been studied extensively and appears to produce modest but real blood pressure reductions in regular consumers. The effect is most pronounced with raw or lightly cooked garlic, where the active compounds are preserved. Adding garlic to your cooking regularly is a simple addition that costs nothing and provides additional benefit. Dark leafy greens, beyond the potassium they provide, contain compounds that support blood vessel health and have been associated with better pressure control in people who consume them regularly. Berries, particularly blueberries and strawberries, contain compounds called anthocyanins that have been associated with blood pressure benefits in studies of regular consumers. Fatty fish, particularly salmon, sardines, mackerel and other fish, high in omega-3 fatty acids, support cardiovascular health broadly and have been associated with blood pressure benefits. 2 or 3 servings per week is the general target. Dark chocolate in moderation, particularly chocolate with high cocoa content of 70% or higher, contains flavonoids that have been studied for blood pressure effects. The amounts that produce measurable effects are small, perhaps an ounce or less per day, which makes this a pleasant but minor contributor to the overall picture. Hibiscus tea has been studied specifically for blood pressure effects, with several studies showing modest reductions in regular consumers. A cup or 2 per day unsweetened can be a useful addition for those who enjoy it. Olive oil, which we discussed in another conversation as part of an overall Mediterranean dietary pattern, has been associated with cardiovascular benefits, including blood pressure improvements. The principle is to think of these foods as additions to an already healthy pattern, rather than as magic interventions on their own. Including them regularly in addition to the broader dietary changes contributes additional benefit. The fifth strategy is to address the specific dietary factors that may be elevating your blood pressure beyond what general patterns address. This is more individualized and requires some attention to your own situation, but it can be among the most impactful changes for specific people. The first factor is excessive alcohol. Regular drinking, particularly more than 1 drink per day for women and 2 for men, contributes significantly to elevated blood pressure. For some people, simply reducing alcohol consumption to recommended levels or below produces meaningful blood pressure improvements within weeks. The second factor is excessive caffeine in sensitive individuals. Most people tolerate moderate caffeine without significant blood pressure effects, but some people are more sensitive and can see meaningful blood pressure elevation from caffeine. If you drink significant amounts of coffee or other caffeinated beverages and your blood pressure has been difficult to control, experimenting with reducing your caffeine intake can be informative. The third factor is sugar, particularly added sugars and sugar-sweetened beverages. Research over the past decade has clarified that added sugar contributes to blood pressure elevation through several mechanisms, including effects on insulin, on inflammation, and on the metabolic patterns that drive hypertension. Reducing sugar-sweetened beverages and other sources of added sugar can produce measurable blood pressure benefits. The fourth factor is licorice consumption, which sounds odd but is a real consideration. Real licorice containing the compound glycyrrhizin can significantly raise blood pressure when consumed regularly. This is found in some traditional candies, some teas, and some supplements. Most candies labeled as licorice in the United States are flavored with anise rather than actual licorice and do not have this effect, but it is worth knowing about. The fifth factor is certain over-the-counter products and supplements that can affect blood pressure. NSAIDs like ibuprofen and naproxen can raise blood pressure with regular use. Decongestants and cold medications can produce significant blood pressure elevation. Certain herbal supplements, including some marketed for energy or weight loss, can affect blood pressure. If you take any of these regularly and your blood pressure has been difficult to control, this is worth examining. The practical strategy is to honestly evaluate your own consumption of these factors and to address any that may be relevant. For many people with stubborn blood pressure problems, identifying one or two of these contributors and addressing them produces significant improvement that they had not been able to achieve through general dietary changes alone. Let me give you a practical summary of how to put all 5 strategies together. Begin by gradually reducing sodium, particularly from processed and packaged foods. Cook more at home. Choose lower sodium versions of foods you eat regularly. Use herbs and spices for flavor. Simultaneously increase potassium-rich foods. Build your meals around vegetables, fruits, beans, and other potassium sources. Aim for several servings each of vegetables and fruits per day. Shift your overall eating pattern toward the DASH principles. More vegetables, fruits, whole grains, fish, beans, and nuts. Less processed food, added sugar, and excessive saturated fat. Include specific blood pressure supportive foods regularly. Beets, garlic, leafy greens, berries, fatty fish, and others. Address the individual factors that may be elevating your blood pressure beyond what general patterns address. Alcohol, caffeine, sugar, certain medications, and supplements. Sustained across weeks and months, these changes can produce blood pressure reductions that are clinically meaningful. For some people, the changes are enough to reduce or eliminate the need for medication. For others, they improve the control achieved with their current medications. For everyone, they contribute to the broader cardiovascular health that protects against heart attack, stroke, and the other consequences of long-term hypertension. I want to be honest about something important. Food alone may not be enough for everyone. For some people, even excellent dietary patterns are insufficient to bring blood pressure to a safe range, and medication is necessary. The dietary changes I have described should be used alongside medication when medication is needed, not as a replacement for it. What you can expect is that consistent application of these strategies will improve your blood pressure to some degree. For some people, the improvement is dramatic. For others, it is modest but still meaningful. For very few, the effect is minimal, usually because other factors are driving the hypertension that food alone cannot address. The relationship with your doctor matters throughout this. As you make dietary changes, your blood pressure may improve enough that your medications need to be adjusted. This adjustment should be done in consultation with your doctor, not on your own. Sudden discontinuation of blood pressure medications can be dangerous, and the dose changes should be made carefully with monitoring. The general approach is to make the dietary changes consistently, to monitor your blood pressure at home, to bring your readings to your doctor regular visits, and to let your medical team adjust your medications as the dietary changes produce their effects. If this has helped you, share it with someone in your life who would benefit. A parent, a spouse, a friend whose blood pressure has been difficult to control. The information matters most when it travels to the people who can use it. And tell me in the comments, tell me which of the 5 strategies you are going to start with. Tell me what changes you have already made and how they have worked. Tell me what questions you still have. The community in those comments helps more people than you may realize. High blood pressure is one of the most common conditions in adult life and one of the most consequential. But it is also one of the most responsive to the choices you make about what to put on your plate. The patient who applies these strategies consistently, alongside whatever medications their doctor has prescribed, is doing some of the most important work available in the prevention of the cardiovascular events that high blood pressure produces. The numbers on your blood pressure cuff are not just abstract values, they are predictors of the health in the years ahead of you. Lower numbers sustained across decades are protective in ways that quietly add up to better health, better function, and more years with the people you love. Higher numbers sustained across decades contribute to the heart attacks, strokes, kidney problems, and cognitive declines that no one wants to face. You have more influence over those numbers than you may realize. The dietary changes I have described tonight are not magic. They are not glamorous, but they are evidence-based, accessible to almost anyone, and capable of meaningful effects when applied consistently. Take what you have heard today. Choose one or two of the strategies to begin with. Apply them consistently for a few weeks. Notice what changes. Add more strategies as the first ones become habit. And let the small daily choices about what you eat become part of the larger pattern of how you take care of the cardiovascular system that is carrying you through your life. Everything I've shared with you today is for educational purposes to help you understand the relationship between food and blood pressure. Every patient is different, and the right specific approach depends on your individual situation, your other medical conditions, and the medications you take. Please continue to work with your doctor on your blood pressure management. If you make significant dietary changes, monitor your blood pressure at home and share the readings with your medical team. Medication adjustments, when they become appropriate, should be made by your doctor. If you have kidney disease, heart failure, or other specific conditions that affect what foods you should eat, please discuss the strategies in this video with your doctor before significantly changing your diet. Some of the recommendations may need to be modified for your individual situation. If you take medications that interact with foods I have mentioned, including the consideration about potassium for patients on certain medications, please be aware of these interactions and discuss them with your doctor or pharmacist. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for being willing to take seriously the role that food can play in your cardiovascular health. And thank you, most of all, for being the kind of person who is willing to make the small daily changes that over time become the larger story of how well you live and how long you live well. Take care of yourself.